Major spoilers for Dead Rising are going to be in this video, as I'll be discussing like the last 80% or so of the game, as well as the ending I experienced in Dead Rising. I'll give one more warning before the spoiler stuff comes, and I'll give you a timestamp to skip to in case you don't want to hear that, but just figured I'd put some in the beginning of the video as well. When Dead Rising first came out back in 2006, I swear they made this game with me in mind. You're stuck in a mall with using whatever you can find to defend yourself. This is one reason why the idea of battle royale games is so appealing to me. You just gotta use what you can find to survive. However, there was a lot of quality of life things, or should I say lack thereof, that I wasn't a huge fan of in the original Dead Rising, and that made the game pretty hard for me to play. And because of that, I never got too deep in it. So naturally, because this game has always piqued my interest and been a thorn in my side, I was very intrigued when I caught wind of the Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster. Due to my past, I was initially very hesitant to get into this game because I know this game was a remaster, not a remake. So I had to know how many of the mechanics got changed before I purchased it. And after watching some reviews and Googling some questions, I think Capcom made just enough changes to where I finally felt this game was playable for me. I can happily report that yes, this game is now very playable. And because of that, I played it and finished it. So let's head to Willamette, Colorado and discuss the Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster. The original Dead Rising was developed and published by Capcom and released on August 8, 2006 as an Xbox 360 exclusive until 2014. However, I played the Deluxe Remaster version of the game, which was developed and published by Capcom as well, and it was released on September 19, 2024 for PS5, Xbox Series consoles, and Windows PCs. I played the PC version, purchased through Steam, so all footage you are seeing is the PC version of the game, recorded using OBS. I did also play this game on my Lenovo Legion Go, and I had some slowdowns for sure when there was a lot of zombies on screen, but it was only when there were like a lot of zombies, so I would say this game is 100% playable on that machine. In Dead Rising, you play as Frank West, a reporter who caught wind of a big story happening in Willamette, Colorado. As he flies in, it's clear this is not your average news story. Frank gets dropped off at the town's mall and tells the helicopter pilot to come back and pick him up in 3 days' time. However, those 3 days quickly become not only a fight for survival, but a fight for the truth, as Frank discovers the town and the mall are infested with zombies, and it's his job to get to the bottom of how this all came to be. First and foremost, I want to discuss the quality of life changes that made this game much more playable for me, and that comes in three forms. The one I was most excited about was the improvements to the shooting. Now, given that this game fully takes place in a mall, shooting and gunplay is definitely not the focus of the game. It is most definitely a melee-focused combat system. But with that being said, the gunplay in the original was just unacceptable, if you ask me. In the original, you could not move while aiming. Also, the default settings would have you aim where Frank is facing, not where the camera is facing, which for a third-person game causes issues, as I'm sure you can imagine. You can change it so you aim in the direction the camera is facing, but that is only on the x-axis, not the y. So if you had the camera looking behind Frank and up and then aimed a gun, Frank would aim the gun in the direction behind him, but only straight ahead at eye level. And given that one of the first boss fights in this game involves Frank shooting at someone on a floor above him, you can see where the issues would come into play. Every time I had to shoot this guy, I had to use some of the short attack window I had to look up and actually aim at him. Thankfully, the Deluxe Remaster remedies this. You can now not only move while aiming, but also actually aim in the direction you want. A lot easier, and this boss fight became a walk in the park because of that, which I'm thankful for. Secondly, there are now autosaves. The main way you save in Dead Rising is by visiting either safe areas or bathrooms. In the original game, there are no autosaves though, so if you die before you can get to a save spot, then you potentially could lose large chunks of playtime. In the Deluxe Remaster, there are frequent autosaves, like about I'd say every time you enter a different area of the mall, or probably after a cutscene. When I died in the Deluxe Remaster, I never lost more than a few minutes of playtime, and that is purely down to the autosave feature being introduced in this version of the game. Lastly, they introduced an actual durability bar for your melee weapons. Weapon durability was in the original game as well, however there was no real representation of how much use an item has left. To my recollection, you would just use an item and then its image in your inventory would just start flashing when it was nearing the end of its usability. This made it kind of hard to plan out your inventory, especially since different items have different durabilities. You could plan on using an item in a boss fight, then after one swing, the item could be almost broken. However, in the Deluxe Remaster, there is a blue bar under your melee items to show how much use they have left, which made swapping out weapons much easier to decide and plan out. However, one big gripe I have with the original game is still present in the Deluxe Remaster as well, and that is those damn convicts in the park. Beginning the first night of the story mode, there will be a military Humvee of convicts driving around in the park of the mall, aka the center area of the map. Especially since you first encounter these guys early in the game, they are very difficult to kill. Between the high speed of the driving, the guy in the passenger seat with the baseball bat, and a third convict manning a mounted machine gun in the back, you would be forgiven for thinking these guys are placed too early in the game. However, they are killable, and thanks to the help of the aiming I discussed earlier, I was able to take these guys out on their first appearance. However, what I say next may really confuse you, and rightfully so. But even after you kill these guys, they continue to respawn in the park not only at night, but every time you enter the park. I just do not understand the logic behind this, as it makes going outside something you want to avoid. Now admittedly, they are kind of easy to avoid, as most of the time they don't even spawn near you, and they do not head straight for you when you are outside, so most of the time they are not an issue. However, if they do find their way over to you, they definitely have a high chance of ruining whatever your plans are. And I have no issue with them being hard to kill, but if I'm able to kill them, they should not be respawning. I distinctively remember I was so gobsmacked by this when playing the original game. I genuinely thought it was a glitch in the game, and could not believe it when I found out it was a legit feature. Genuinely jaw-dropped I was, so I really wish they had a permadeath for these guys in the Deluxe Remaster. However, what is permanent is your time limit on objectives in this game. Just like the original game, every single objective, both main and side, have a time limit attached to it. And if you can't get to it or finish it within the time limit, then guess what? You are simply shit out of luck. And yes, that does apply to the main story as well. If you fail to complete a story objective in the time you are given, then you are locked out of completing the story and getting to the bottom of the scoop. And you'll just have to survive until the helicopter comes back to pick you up. I am not sure how I feel about this, honestly. On one hand, I enjoy it because Capcom keeps the time limits pretty tight, so there's not a lot of downtime and you are always doing something. But on the other hand, I don't like being locked out of stuff purely because I don't get to it when the game wanted me to. When I play RPGs, I'm a firm believer in the quote-unquote true playthrough, I guess I'll call it, and not reloading a save because something happened you didn't like. You live with the consequences. But I don't know how I feel about being locked out of something due to time rather than a choice I made with a certain faction or something, for example. Especially the main story. You could just be locked out of the whole story if you missed the time of an early objective or something. You could just be stuck surviving for 72 in-game hours with no story missions to do if that's the case. I'm not even saying I would do every single objective either. I might have just chosen to miss some, but to quote the great Robin Scherbatsky from How I Met Your Mother, it's one thing to not want something, it's another to be told you can't have it. But one thing I was thankful to have in this game was the psychopaths. These were humans who have been surviving in the mall, but as I'm sure you could have guessed, have a few screws loose. And I feel these individuals were named very appropriately. If a zombie outbreak occurred, it would definitely cause some people to go a little to a lot crazy, and that is what happened to these individuals. These boss fights were often my favorite part about these games, as it mixed up the gameplay for a brief bit and let you experience a little boss fight. But what especially captivated me most about these crazies were just how crazy they were. Each encounter/fight with one starts with a cutscene introduction to them, and these people are properly crazy. It was always a joy to see just how nuts this person was and how unique their craziness was to other people in the world and how they view this apocalyptic situation. However, during these fights, as well as throughout the whole game, I typically had the same arsenal in my inventory because I feel the weapon balancing is a little out of whack here. I feel like the weapons in this game fall under two categories: useless and god tier. A lot of stuff I would pick up and use, I would immediately put back down because it took me 2 minutes to kill a zombie with it. And then after I set that down, I would pick up something else and one hit every zombie around me. Because of that, I often found myself with the same loadout of weapons and not wanting to experiment as much as I would have liked to. Compounding this effect was the fact that items are either on unlimited supply in some spots, depending if you're in a store or whatever, or either respawn whenever you enter the area. For example, I always went back to Paradise Plaza and the path to the security room to either lead some survivors back to the safe room or for story purposes. In the upstairs section of Paradise Plaza, there's a little restaurant with an unlimited supply of orange juice to recoup health, as well as a katana which slices through zombies like a hot knife through butter, sneakily hiding on the awning over the edge. I cannot count how many times I stopped here to stock up on OJ and grab this katana because it always respawns here. Along with that, once I found the sword store, the gun store, the hardware store, and so on and so forth, as was in terms of like other OP stores, I often found myself prioritizing going to these locations to arm up rather than try something new using closer stores. So between the weapon imbalance and the ease of getting super OP weapons, the need for experimentation and trying out new items felt very absent, and I'm kind of disappointed by that. Last little point I want to talk about before getting to spoilers is the AI the survivors you escort around is just really dumb, I feel. They are not good at defending themselves nor at following you. Once you know this though, you can definitely compensate for it pretty easily, but I wouldn't be shocked if they use the same AI code / program or model or whatever you want to call it as the original game since it seems so primitive. Alright, at this point I'm going to be discussing the latter parts of the game as well as the ending, so big spoiler warning here. If this is something you don't want to hear, skip to the timestamp displayed on the screen. I'll give you a little bit to do that in case you're doing dishes or something. Now with that out of the way, let's talk about the latter bits of Dead Rising. There are multiple endings in this game, so I can only speak on the one I received, but based on some research, it seems to be the canon ending. Towards the end of the game, Jesse, a Department of Homeland Security agent Frank has befriended, informs you that the US government will not be rescuing Frank and other survivors, and instead will be sending in the military to not only kill all the zombies, but all the humans too in an effort to hide this ordeal from the general public. I was able to complete all story objectives and get to the helipad in time to hitch a ride out. However, as the pilot flies over to Frank, a zombie manages to get inside the helicopter, killing the pilot and crashing the copter. Frank then collapses on the helipad in disbelief and is then rescued by Isabella, an enemy turned ally in the story. In a safe room, still in the mall, Isabella informs Frank that he will be turning into a zombie unless he can get her the needed ingredients and equipment for an antidote. At this point in the game, there are very few zombies left in the game, and your main enemy is the military soldiers that are sweeping the mall. These guys are undoubtedly the toughest enemies in the game outside of the boss fights. Hell, they even might be tougher than some of the bosses. And I feel the combat model in this game is not built to handle these kinds of enemies. Zombies are slow, weak, don't hit very hard, and need to be right near you to do damage. These soldiers are, in comparison to the zombies, fast, tough, hit like a truck, and armed with ranged weapons. The combat model Capcom built in this game obviously is meant to handle hordes of zombies, and it does that quite well. But because of that, fighting small numbers of soldiers whose attributes are polar opposite is very clunky and hard to use. And with these soldiers being the main enemy type for this chunk of the game, combat was definitely something I tried to avoid. And yes, some of those boss fights were clunky for the same reasons, but those also lasted only a minute or two, not the final few hours of the game. And speaking of the final hours of the game, I want to talk about the final minute or so of the game. It concludes with Frank and Isabella sneaking out of the mall through an underground tunnel, but eventually you get cut off by Brock, the military leader. Frank then has to defeat him in a fist fight on top of a tank. But once you kill him, a cutscene begins where Frank drops to his knees on top of the tank, screaming. Then the screen turns to black. with the events taking place after this cutscene being told through text on the screen. This does not sit well with me. This is right up there with It Was All a Dream in terms of the laziest ways to wrap up a story in any form of media, not just games. I would have at least liked to see some cutscenes of what happened. To resort to just text is laziness of the highest degree. No matter what the text says, it leaves the ending of the game feeling very hollow and unfulfilling. So for both those points, I feel the last few hours of this game were very unnecessary and more of a slog than it was fun. I would have much preferred to see the helicopter land just fine, Frank gets out without an issue, and see some cutscenes at the end that at least talk about what happened to Frank after the mall. Very disappointed with the last 80 or so percent of the game. Despite my issues with the Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster or the Dead Rising story, whatever you want to call it, I still definitely enjoyed my time with it. I think the changes both to gameplay and visuals are very welcomed. Capcom finally allowed me to pull the thorn that is Dead Rising out of my side after 6 or 7 years. I didn't get to the game immediately when it first dropped, so it's kind of hard to say how long it's been, but it's been a long damn time. Since I never completed the original game, it's hard for me to say if the Deluxe Remaster is 100% worth it, but since I was able to actually beat the game this time, I'm inclined to say it is. But if you are like me and want to play Dead Rising with the smoothest possible experience, the Deluxe Remaster is for sure the way to go. I will not lie, when I went to buy this on Steam for $50 and saw the original was still available for a measly $10, I was definitely tempted. But after playing it, I believe the $40 difference was money well spent. Oh, it feels good to get this game finally out of my backlog, but not as good as providing you with something to watch. Thank you so much for giving this video your time and attention. I appreciate it. If you do feel so inclined, please do hit that thumbs up button. It goes a long way for us here at Milkman Media. Next, being the sucker I am for SpongeBob games, I will be jumping into the Patrick Star game to see my boy Pat get in the spotlight for a change. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that, other gaming videos, or any other food videos I put out. Lastly, let's talk about Dead Rising in the comments, your experience with the original game, the remaster, the series as a whole, or anything you want to say. Please let me know in the comments. I'd love to talk to you about it there. Thanks again for watching. I'll hang out in the comments, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.